No way she survives out there." That was all anyone said when they saw a small female medic step into the SEAL formation. Too frail, too quiet, too ordinary to march beside the most elite warriors in America. But then, in a scorched Texas valley, when the gunfire erupted, when men once thought unbreakable fell bleeding into the dust, she did not run. She charged straight into the storm of bullets. And in the very moment when everyone believed it was over, she pulled all three of them back from the hands of death. Her name was Sergeant Leah Morgan. A woman with brown hair always tied neatly at the nape of her neck. Her slender frame looked as if the wind could carry her away, yet anyone who looked closely would notice in her stride a steady weight, a resilience not easily shaken. She arrived at the SEAL base in Coronado, California on a sun-drenched morning where beach sand still clung to the sailors' boots, and from that very moment, Leah became the subject of conversation. No one there was accustomed to the presence of someone like her. Hardened, sunburned men who lived with the cold steel of Barrett rifles, who thought nothing of 30-mile night marches, who measured days by gunpowder and blood, now suddenly had to share space with a frail woman who carried the title of medic. To them it seemed absurd, like sending a veterinarian onto a NASCAR track. The whispers spread quickly, passed around with half smiles and mocking grins. Medics belong in the infirmary, not the front line. Another rifle would have been more useful. Sometimes those jokes burst into raucous laughter, the kind that sounded like beer cans popping open on the training field. Not truly malicious, but sharp enough to carve an invisible line. Leah was an outsider, and they wanted her to know it. Yet Leah never reacted. Not once did she snap back, not once did she show offense. She simply tightened the strap of her medic's bag, the strap that had carved calluses into her shoulder after years in the field, and went on with her work. That very first morning, while the SEALs adjusted rifle stocks or retied bootlaces, Leah crouched beside her medical pack, opening each compartment, checking everything with meticulous care, bandages counted, tourniquets rolled tight, syringes lined up like instruments in an orchestra waiting for the conductor's cue. If anyone had paid attention, they would have seen how her fingers moved quick, yet never rushed, like the hands of a musician who knew her instrument by heart. What others dismissed as cluttered medical gear, Leah handled like weapons sharpened for battle, silent, precise, deadly in their own way. Now and then, her eyes flicked around, not to return scorn, but to memorize the smallest details. A loose strap on body armor, a canteen drained too quickly, a shoulder favoring the left side, little things her teammates ignored. They saw her as misplaced. But in her steady gaze, Leah was already reading more than they imagined. Coronado was not kind to newcomers, least of all a female medic. The training ground reeked of sweat, laced with sea salt. The thud of boots on concrete pounded like a war drum. Around her, men loomed like slabs of iron, arms corded with muscle, shoulders broad as walls. They moved in formation, joked aloud, carried themselves with the swagger of those convinced nothing could break them. In their midst, Leah was a dot of stillness in the storm. And strangely, she never flinched. Anyone else might have tried to prove themselves with loud words or by mimicking the men's brutal workouts. Leah chose silence instead, but it was not the silence of fear. It was a different kind, one that unsettled people because it came from a quiet confidence, as if she knew something they didn't. During brief pauses, a few men watched her on the sly. To them, Leah looked more like a suburban nurse than a soldier preparing for combat. Her uniform didn't stretch tight over bulging muscles. It fit neatly over a compact frame. But look closer, and you would see the firm line of her shoulders, sinewy arms not built in modern gyms, but carved by years of lifting patients, by trudging through forests and rivers with a medic's pack heavy as stone. Others didn't realize it, but Leah knew the value of every single item she carried, every roll of gauze, every syringe. Each instrument could mean the difference between life and death. And more than anyone, she understood. Her job was not to be liked, but to be ready. her ready for the moment when everyone else would be overwhelmed. Amid the laughter, sometimes clumsy, sometimes cruel, no one saw the truth, that the small woman they joked about might one day be the only one standing between them and death. They saw a medic. She saw potential patients she would never allow to be lost. That afternoon, when the sunlight poured gold across Coronado, Leah sat alone on the barracks steps, polishing her scalpel and rearranging her kit. Around her, the raucous laughter of teammates echoed like waves crashing on the beach. She didn't join them, didn't walk away either. She simply sat there, quiet but unyielding like a piece of steel no storm could erode, a piece that refused to blend in yet fit exactly where it needed to be. At Coronado, people only knew Leah Morgan as a medic who had fallen out of the sky, an exception assigned to a place reserved for men who trusted only in their biceps and their Barrett rifles. But no one truly knew her past. There were no files gleaming with medals, no barroom tales of heroic feats retold into legend. The only thing that existed was a fragment of memory that clung to Leah like a shadow that would never fade. Years earlier, when Hurricane Katrina swallowed the Louisiana coast, Leah had been nothing more than a volunteer nurse, not yet in uniform. The images of those days were seared into her mind. Water rising to engulf the city, rooftops turning into islands, cries for help mingling with the relentless wail of rescue sirens. Leah and her volunteer team set up a field hospital in the yard of an abandoned high school. There was no air conditioning, no proper beds, only the musty stench of rotting wood and the weak glow of flashlights. There, she witnessed the cruelest truth. Patients waiting too long, their bodies cooling as rescue forces failed to arrive in time. Leah had once spent an entire night holding the frail, bony hand of an old woman just so she wouldn't die alone. She remembered vividly the wide eyes of a little boy clutching a soaked teddy bear, sitting beside his mother who no longer breathed. Those memories were not stories one tells to earn points. But from the wreckage of Katrina, something within her changed forever. Leah swore she would never again stand by and watch someone die simply because help didn't come in time. Rumor had it that after that disaster, she always carried a small object. A silver band of metal, its edges worn, engraved with words as cold as they were fierce. Zero casualty is acceptable. No one knew who had carved it for her. Perhaps an old colleague, perhaps Leah herself, her hands trembling as she turned a vow into something tangible. But anyone who saw it swaying from her medic bag understood. It wasn't jewelry. It was a declaration. At Coronado, however, that detail only made her more of an outlier. The SEALs would joke, with a lucky charm like that, guess she doesn't even need a gun. Others scoffed, saying the words sounded good but had no place in reality. War was a place where casualties were inevitable. What difference could a medic make? Leah didn't argue. Sometimes she would simply brush her thumb against the silver band, as if reminding herself of that night in Louisiana when cries for help were swallowed by the floodwaters. To her, those words were not a delusion, but the only milestone that marked her path. Once, while she was inspecting her gear, a young teammate casually asked, "Why do you check every single thing, over and over? Who does it 3 times?" Leah only smiled, without answering. He couldn't understand, but Leah did. In that makeshift hospital, one missing roll of gauze could mean the loss of a life. That memory, like an invisible scar, would never heal. At times, during breaks, Leah would sit at the edge of the yard, her eyes drifting toward the endless blue of the Pacific. Others thought she was daydreaming, but in truth, her mind returned to images of thousands of rooftops submerged beneath a sea of water. Those fragments of memory never left her. They became fuel, transforming a slender nurse into a medic who refused to yield. Ironically, it was that silence of hers that sometimes unsettled the men. A few seasoned SEALs muttered, "Something's not right with her. Who works like tomorrow's the end of the world?" Others grew curious. Did she go through something we can't even imagine? The truth was, yes. But Leah never needed their belief. She knew trust only arrived in chaos, when theory and prejudice both collapsed. In those moments, one question alone would remain: who is the one who will not abandon their teammates? Perhaps that silver band was never meant to be a mere trinket hanging from her pack. Perhaps it was a moving reminder that sometimes it only takes one person willing to defy convention to rewrite the ending. And so, beneath the harsh sun of Coronado, Leah carried on with her quiet ritual, checking, memorizing, preparing as if Katrina might return without warning. Around her, the laughter continued, but beneath that laughter, cracks had begun to form, because they knew deep down some stories never needed to be spoken. They lived in her gaze, in the hardened calluses of her shoulder, and in a weathered silver band that swayed silently at her side. Dear audience, grab a glass of water, take a moment to relax, and keep listening to the story. The twists are still to come. And please drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the world. Drop a 1 in the comments if you find this story gripping, so we can keep bringing you more captivating tales. Texas at noon was not just hot, it was searing. The sun poured down into the border valley, a harsh, blinding white light, turning slabs of rock into open furnaces, while the air hung heavy, suffocating, like a wet blanket pressed against the chest. The SEAL team moved in staggered formation along the ridge, boots crunching over gravel, every pair of eyes sweeping cracks and shadows. No one spoke. The silence was broken only by the scrape of stone underfoot and the steady rasp of breath dragged through parched throats. In the middle of the line, Leah Morgan moved like a shadow, the weight of her medic's bag pressing into her shoulders. Unlike her teammates, she wasn't scanning for movement along the ridges. What she watched were the smallest details, sometimes so small even their owners didn't notice. The way Kowalski drained his canteen in less than 3 minutes. The unnatural flush spreading across his face. The ragged, sprint-like gasps even though the team's pace remained steady. Without a word, Leah pulled an electrolyte packet from her pocket and held it out. Kowalski shot her a glance, smirk curling with disdain, as if insulted by the thought that he, a seasoned SEAL, needed the same lemon-flavored powder marathon runners used. He shook his head and pushed ahead, boots slamming into the ground harder than necessary. But 10 minutes later, when his stride faltered, it was Leah who caught him and eased him down before his body collapsed under heat shock. Captain Ramirez, cold as steel, cut his gaze toward her. His eyes carried no praise, yet the flicker within them was enough for Leah to know he understood. He didn't speak, and she didn't need him to. In the military, sometimes silence is the clearest recognition of all. The march continued. The ground sloped downward, layers of dirt breaking loose and rolling like marbles, demanding perfect balance with every step. Leah's gaze caught Santos, the youngest of the team, gripping his rifle strap too tightly, veins standing out not from strain but from nerves. On Ramirez's shoulder, the radio crackled in static bursts, the sound like metal scratching the inside of the ear. Leah noted it all, as if reading a book written in a language only she understood. Not everyone appreciated it. Danner, the one who always grinned when tension rose, tilted his chin toward Leah and whispered to Kowalski, "Our doc's babysitting again, like a kindergarten teacher." Both men chuckled, their laughter swallowed quickly by the scorching wind, yet still loud enough for Leah to hear. She didn't react. She was used to it at Coronado. The laughter had been as common as grains of sand. Instead of answering back, she logged another detail, the way Kowalski's left foot avoided sharp stones, a telltale sign of an old injury not yet healed. To the SEALs, such things were no big deal. To Leah, they were warnings. The atmosphere grew heavier, not just from the heat, but from Leah's presence, an element the team still didn't know how to place. Was she a medic, dead weight, or an unsettling mirror reflecting flaws they preferred to ignore? It was her silence that unnerved them most. Because when you're used to being the strongest in the room, no one likes the quiet one who sees weakness, even if she never says it aloud. Ramirez looked at her again. He had lived long enough in battle to know excessive calm in a place like this was not naivety. It was experience. He didn't know what she had endured before arriving here, but the way she spotted things, skin tone, breath rhythm, the angle of a shoulder made him wonder. Perhaps behind that small frame lay something even his hardened seals hadn't yet grasped. The sun climbed higher, its rays like knives slashing down. The valley glared white, shadows thinning to nothing. They reached the dry riverbed, a stretch of pale gravel, stark as a scar cut into the earth. To seals it was textbook. A dried-out riverbed flanked by steep cliffs was nothing less than a funnel-perfect ground for an ambush. Leah recognized it too, not from tactical training, but from memory. Katrina surged back in her mind. That feeling when you stand in a place that seems safe, and then, without warning, a flood crashes in from nowhere. This valley was the same, empty, too quiet, and ominous in its stillness. When Ramirez raised his fist, the team dropped low, eyes scouring the ridges. Silence. Nothing but cicadas buzzing, and heat shimmering upward from stone. But Leah's eyes caught what others missed. A brief glint of metal on the slope, a rock out of place, and most telling of all the tension coiled in Ramirez's shoulders, though he feigned calm. She said nothing. This was not the time for a medic to deliver tactical warnings. But deep inside, Leah knew. The silence of nature was often the loudest drumbeat of the storm to come. The first sound struck like a slap across the air, a gunshot cracking sharp and violent, tearing through silence already strung tight as wire. No one had time to react before the telltale shriek of an RPG came slicing down from the hillside, dragging behind it a white trail of smoke like a giant serpent weaving across the sky. The explosion shattered the stone floor. Dust erupted in choking clouds. Shards flew like metallic rain, embedding into anything in their path. The formation that had been tight and disciplined broke instantly. Men dove left and right, combat instinct forcing every muscle to scramble for cover, whether it was a shallow crack in the rock or a jagged boulder barely big enough to shield half a body. In that chaos, 3 figures went down. Kowalski clutched his thigh, blood spurting in hard, rhythmic bursts, staining the pale gravel beneath him crimson. Danner, the one always grinning wide, now lay on his back, chest punctured, his breath rasping in short, broken gasps, like air being dragged through a torn bellows. Santos, the youngest, had his arm ripped open by shrapnel, blood spraying in dark streams that mixed with the blistering dust. The field medicine manual, Leah knew by heart. When casualties strike, you triage. Save those with the highest chance of survival first, leave the rest behind, because one man can mean the difference between the survival of many. But Leah, at the very moment she saw 3 of her brothers bleeding out on the rocks, knew she would never do that. In her mind, Katrina came roaring back the faces left behind, the ones lost because help never came in time. And this time, she would not let history repeat itself. Leah hurled herself forward. No orders. No calculations. Bullets sliced past her head, each one whispering like a blade skimming the ear. She hit the ground flat, crawling, dragging the medic's bag behind her, its straps rasping loud against the gravel. Her sleeves tore, rocks scraped her arms raw, but she never stopped. Kowalski was first. His face was already ashen, lips trembling as if cursing, but no sound came. Leah didn't waste a second. She ripped out a tourniquet, looped it high on his thigh, twisted until a scream ripped from him and the blood stopped spraying. No time for comfort. She rolled, dragging herself to Danner. He was still conscious, coughing up thick ropes of dark blood. The sound was as cold as bent metal snapping. Leah tore open a chest seal, pressed it hard over the wound, her hand locked in place, as if letting go for even a second would let his life escape. She leaned close, voice steady enough to anchor him even through the chaos. "Stay with me." You're going to be all right. And impossibly, despite the bullets screaming overhead, that single sentence dimmed the panic in Danner's eyes. Santos lay farther off, one arm barely intact, his uniform soaked in spreading red. Leah crawled through falling debris as a burst of rounds tore into the rock above, sending stone fragments raining down like splinters. Still, she pushed on. Gauze pressed, bandage wound tight, blood flow slowed beneath her grip. In just minutes, 3 men that the textbook might have written off Leah had wrestled each of them back from the edge. The team kept firing, but every eye flicked toward her. The small woman, the one they had mocked, now lay exposed in open fire, doing the unthinkable, refusing to leave anyone behind. And strangely, that sight alone made them shoot harder, fiercer, throwing steel and fire to cover her. Deep down, they knew she was fighting for them in a way their rifles never could. In the middle of the firefight, Leah thought briefly of the joke from a few days before. Medics belong in the clinic, not on the front lines. If she had the breath to laugh, she would have. Because the clinic today was nothing more than this riverbed of blood and gunpowder, and her patients were men who once looked invincible. Sometimes life had its own twisted humor, except here it used live rounds instead of laughter. Sweat mixed with blood stinging her eyes. Leah blinked hard, again and again, but her hands never faltered. As she bandaged, she counted silently pulse beats, breaths, seconds passing. This was no longer just first aid, it was a race against death itself. Every heartbeat a tick on the clock. Bullets still cracked. Screams still echoed. But inside Leah's focus, the world had narrowed to 3 fragile lives, gasping in the dirt. And she knew, in that moment, she wasn't merely a medic. She was the line between life and death, the only reason hope had not yet been extinguished in that burning valley. Amid the gunfire hammering against the cliff walls, Leah knew bandages alone would never be enough. If they stayed there, sprawled in the open riverbed, every tourniquet, every pressure wrap, every hemostatic dressing would buy only a few more agonizing minutes, not life. She had to move them. And that was the most reckless decision imaginable. The kind anyone watching would dismiss with a shake of the head. A woman weighing barely 130 pounds, carrying a medic's bag heavy as half her body, now planning to drag full-grown seals, each 100 pounds heavier, straight across a battlefield exploding with fire. She began with Kowalski. He was as heavy as a boulder, his blood-soaked vest slick in her grip. Leah wrapped her arms beneath his armpits and pulled inch by inch, his boots scraping grooves through the searing gravel. Every yard won was its own private war. A bullet slammed into the ground inches from her hip, shards of rock ripped through her pant leg. But Leah never let go. Every breath was a strain that felt like lifting the earth itself, and every burst of machine gun fire overhead only drove her harder forward. At last, she dragged him into a shallow depression in the earth, not safe but safer. Without pausing, Leah lunged for Danner. His eyes bulged wide in panic, chest wound heaving under blood-soaked dressings, every breath a gamble. Moving him was perilous, too much jarring could collapse his lung completely. Leah knew it. But she also knew leaving him in the open riverbed was a death sentence faster than any injury. She lowered herself, gripped the straps of his vest, and hauled him carefully, deliberately, guided by the instinct of someone who had carried dozens of patients on improvised stretchers back during Katrina. Bullets cracked behind her, shards stung her face, but still she steadied his head, shielded his chest, moved him without letting his breathing spiral out of control. For a fleeting moment she thought, if he were conscious enough, he'd probably be cursing her for violating patient transport protocol. But right now, that was the only broken protocol that could save him. Santos was last. The blast had hurled him aside, his blood still seeping stubbornly past the pressure bandage. He was young, his face stamped with disbelief, as though he still couldn't accept this was real. Leah grabbed the sling of his rifle across his chest and dragged him in jerks, one wrenching pull at a time. The weight pressed fire into her back, pain stabbing as if her spine might splinter. Sweat streamed into her mouth, tasting bitter and raw. Bullets ripped past her ears like monstrous bees, the sound enough to make anyone duck for cover. Instead, Leah barked a hoarse laugh through clenched teeth. "If you survive this, I'm suing you for being over-regulation weight." The muttered line was just to keep herself conscious, a sliver of dark humor to stop her heart from breaking stride. When all three men were finally dragged into the depression, Leah allowed herself exactly 10 seconds. 10 seconds to shake, to gasp as if her lungs were burning, to recognize that she had just done what none of the men around her, least of all the three she had saved, ever believed she could do. But 10 seconds was all. Then she pushed herself upright, checking pulses, tightening dressings, dripping the last of her water onto their cracked lips. The other soldiers, crouched behind rocks, kept firing but couldn't stop glancing back at her. They no longer needed convincing. In a single string of actions, Leah had demolished every boundary. She was no longer the medic they mocked, no longer the outsider the team was forced to carry. She was the only reason three teammates were still breathing in the storm of fire. And somehow her small but relentless presence drove them to pull triggers harder, faster, fiercer, like they owed her a wall of bullets in return. Leah never thought of honor, never thought of recognition. In her mind there was only one principle: no one gets left behind. The words became the axis of her every move, turning pain and exhaustion into fuel. On that battlefield she was no longer the Katrina nurse, no longer the Coronado medic. She was the living embodiment of the vow etched into a worn piece of silver. The valley shook with explosions, but in the hollow where Leah knelt, there was another kind of silence, the silence of three lives pulled back from the hands of death. At first, the mocking laughter still echoed in memory, the half-joking, half-serious remarks that a medic belonged in the clinic, that another rifle would be more useful. But in the moment Leah crawled face down through the storm of bullets, those laughs vanished. In eyes that were trained to see comrades only through the crosshairs, the SEALs witnessed something they had never imagined: a small woman exposing herself to fire, dragging three massive warriors out of death's reach without hesitation, without calculation. Ramirez, whose face had always been cold as steel, was the first to change. His voice thundered through the radio, striking the cliffs like a hammer. "Suppressive fire! Keep their heads down!" And instantly the team responded. No more token bursts, but a wall of gunfire pouring down on every enemy nest along the ridge. Fingers clenched their triggers with new fury, because they understood that now not just their lives, but their honor itself was in Leah's hands. Everyone still standing, everyone still holding a weapon, threw everything into protecting her. Not one SEAL saw Leah as a burden anymore. On the contrary, they fought for her, for the one who had dared to do what none of them could, or dared to do. Amid the frantic heartbeat of the battle, an unspoken truth spread among them. Leah was no longer the medic, she was a teammate. Then came the roar, the familiar chopping thunder of helicopter blades slicing the air. The entire valley seemed to tremble as a Black Hawk skimmed low, dust billowing in suffocating clouds. Its door guns spat fiery streaks down onto the rocks, pounding like thunder. The enemy faltered, ducking back into cracks in the hillside. That fleeting moment was enough for Leah to continue. She didn't stop. Her legs shook with exhaustion, her hands felt numb, as if turned to rubber, yet she clung to the straps of each man, dragging them closer to the waiting helicopter. When the crew rushed out to help, she wasn't only shoving her teammates onto stretchers, she was reporting every detail of their wounds with a voice steady as stone. Left thigh, tourniquet in place, major blood loss but stabilized. Chest wound, sealed dressing, needs immediate surgery. Right arm destroyed, pressure bandage applied, monitor for shock. Her tone was unnervingly calm, almost clinical, not quivering even under the roar of engines. And it was that composure that stunned the crew. Most medics would panic in chaos like this. Leah, however, delivered her report like reading from a manual, but her eyes blazed with relentless resolve. Ramirez stood beside her, sand whipping his face raw, staring at Leah as though seeing something he had never believed in. Through his career, he had witnessed extraordinary scenes, but this was different. Leah hadn't felled a single enemy, hadn't led a charge, yet through sheer refusal to quit, she had done what no one else in the squad could. She had turned certain defeat into a chance at survival. In the dust-filled moment, Ramirez pulled the worn patch from his vest. The sealed trident, stained with sweat and age, he pressed it into Leah's hand. No ceremony, no flourish, just 4 words, "You've earned this." It was more than a gesture. For any SEAL, the trident is not cloth and thread, it is history, it is blood. It is the pledge that the bearer has been accepted into the most closed circle, where trust is built on lives. And now, a medic the one once ridiculed, dismissed was given it, in the middle of battle, before every witness. In their eyes, contempt had disappeared. In its place was respect too deep for words. Leah hadn't asked, hadn't demanded. She had simply lived her conviction, and that alone forced the proudest warriors to bow their heads in recognition. The helicopter lifted, tilting away from the scarred riverbed, the dust rising like a curtain to conceal the scene. But in the memory of everyone there, one image would never fade. The slight frame of Leah Morgan, quiet but unyielding, the reason 3 SEALs still drew breath on the stretcher. And from that moment on, no one ever dared call her an outsider again. The official report after that battle was so dry it bordered on heartless. 3 wounded soldiers were successfully evacuated, returned to duty after 6 weeks. No detail about the storm of bullets. No mention of the desperate crawl across the riverbed, and not a single word about Leah Morgan. In those cold lines, it was as if the event had never truly happened, or if it had, it was reduced to nothing more than another statistic buried among thousands of missions. But out there, in the SEAL halls, in the makeshift tents of forward bases, the story spread in whispers, then grew into a chorus. The tale of a small medic who refused to abandon her comrades, who dragged 3 massive men out of the El Paso riverbed, while the sky itself poured fire upon them. Those who had witnessed it did not tell it with exaggeration, but with solemn eyes, for there are things greater than words, and Leah had touched that place. The silver tag dangling from her medic bag, the one etched with the words, "Zero casualty is acceptable," once a private vow, had now passed beyond the personal. It became legend. In boot camp sessions, commanders invoked it as a warning that strength is not only in muscle or firepower, but in the courage that refuses to accept loss. Around campfires at night, as beer cans were passed from hand to hand, the men spoke of the medic of El Paso with half smiles, half reverence. No one needed to name her, because when the story was told, everyone knew it meant Leah. The strange thing was that Leah herself never sought recognition. Back at base, she quietly cleaned her scalpels, checked her bandages, rearranged her medic bag. She was silent, as if nothing had happened, as if the world had not just witnessed a miracle. But that silence, to her teammates, no longer felt like distance. It became proof of something rare, a strength that does not demand acknowledgement, yet is acknowledged all the same. Kowalski, once recovered, carried a limp he jokingly called Leah's mark. Danner, with the scar stretching across his chest, boasted that the ladies love it, a bit of humor to turn pain into pride. Santos learned to shoot left-handed, and whenever anyone asked, he would grin and say, "Trust me, I'm better now." Yet deep inside, all 3 knew they were alive to tell those jokes only because of Leah. Ramirez, the man who had once spoken no more than necessary, now, whenever a new recruit asked about the meaning of the trident patch, would slowly recount the story of El Paso. He never used words like hero or miracle. He would simply say, "Sometimes the only difference between life and death is one person refusing to quit." And then he would leave the rookies to think on it themselves. The image of Leah, Sitting alone under the Coronado sun, polishing her instruments, no longer evoked isolation. It evoked the woman who had redefined what it meant to be a teammate. She was not a SEAL in the traditional sense. She needed no bulging muscles or kill counts. But she had proven that courage wears many shapes, and sometimes the smallest frame carries the greatest weight. On certain nights, when the Pacific breeze drifted across the base, Leah would unconsciously reach for the silver tag. It was more scratched now, its edges worn, yet the words were still clear. 0 casualty is acceptable. It was no longer just her personal oath. It was a flame passed on to the team, then to the wider brotherhood, a flame no official report, no bureaucratic silence could ever extinguish. And so, one day, when a young soldier arrives, swaggering with the belief that strength is everything, someone will lean in and tell him, once, there was a small medic who saved 3 SEALs in El Paso. She didn't quit, so they lived to tell the tale. And that story will be told again and again, like a legend that never grows old. And you, my dear audience, brace yourselves for the next twist in this jaw-dropping story. So, before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're truly loving what I'm doing here. And drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe.